Okay. So got some serious background noise here. Sorry. Okay, so let's see. I'll play this clip again. I want to point something out.
You guys to be called great in the kingdom of heaven and not the least. Okay, so then what you are claiming is that by what you're doing, you're going to be greater than us in the.
So I said, tell me how to understand Matthew 5:19. Let me read it. I didn't say anything. I said, tell me how to understand Matthew 19. I didn't say anything about me being greater. Jesus said it. Who's greater and why? It's just what Jesus says. Just reading, I'm just asking you about how to understand this text. Not to get triggered. I mean, unless you don't believe Jesus. Think not that I've come to destroy the law or the prophets. I am not come to destroy, but to fulfill. For verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass away, not one jot or tittle shall no wise pass from the law till all is fulfilled. Whoever therefore shall break one of the least of these commandments, and shall teach men so, shall be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. And by the way, it doesn't mean that you're in the kingdom of heaven. It could mean that. But you can be called the least in the kingdom of heaven and not be there. Whoever shall do and teach them, the same shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. It's not even talking about who's in the kingdom per se. It's not even necessarily about after the end. Could be talking about the angels and how they speak of people who teach one thing or teach another thing. But apparently, people in heaven, in the kingdom of heaven, suggests, well, I mean, the kingdom of heaven exists now. I mean, so take it either way you want, whether it be people in heaven or angels in heaven or God in heaven. It's either saved people, holy angels, or God, who will be, Jesus says, will be calling those who teach men to break the commandments and teach that, because you either keep them or you break them. There's no third option, okay? You either don't hate your brother or you love your brother. You either think about, in any given circumstance, you either lust after a woman or you do not. There's no third option. So if you teach men that they can break the commandments and you break the commandments, you're called least in the kingdom of heaven. That's what Jesus said, not me, Jesus. Again, that's what Jesus said. So if that's not for us, and it's actually better to not follow that, please be clear that you don't think that Jesus is teaching for us. Because he's talking about the commandments. He's talking about the 10 commandments or the commandments of God. Is the Sermon on the Mount for us when he magnified the law? Are you not under the law of Christ? I am. So if that makes me a heretic, I'm a heretic. But I think if you don't follow Christ's teachings, I don't know why you'd call yourself a Christian. I guess you might be a Paulian, a false Paulian.
The kingdom of heaven. Well, that's just great. I mean, if that's what you think, but I don't think that's actually what you teach. That we're just simply, one of us is going to be greater than the other in the kingdom of heaven by doing what you do, unless you're suddenly changing your stance from being an SDA. I mean, because if you're saying, well, that's the case, then no, I don't think I deserve to be greater than anybody else. So yeah, then If you think you're going to have a bigger mansion than me because you think that you're
No, and that's false humility there. I'm just saying, what is Christ talking about? I'm not fighting over who's greater. I'm saying, what does Christ mean when he says that? Is it true? Are you not saying that God is telling you, like, if you disagree with me, okay, so does that mean that Christ prefers you to do the opposite of what he's saying here, since you're a Christian? This is for the Jews or something, and if it's not for the Christians to follow, he doesn't mean it for you and me. I guess that's what you're saying. If I'm trying to be so, like, that's what I was asking. Is this teaching for us? And what are the commandments he's talking about? That's the question. Clearly, he's saying the one who does this will be, it's what God wants. And the one who doesn't do this will be shameful. It's shameful. You might call the one a good and faithful servant and the other one a shameful servant. I mean, that's what Jesus is saying there. So the question is that for us? Is it certainly not for us? Should we not do that? Because it's clearly saying, he's saying this is good, this isn't good. The one who does this is doing something good. The one who isn't doing that is doing something wrong. So that's the question. What is it that they're doing wrong? And what is the person that's doing something right doing? And it's obvious. If the one who's breaking the least commandment and teaching men to do that is least, the one who does and teaches it is greater. Not necessarily ontologically or whatever, just that's what he's saying. I didn't say it. Jesus said it. So tell me, what is he talking about and what does it mean? I think it means you should teach even the least commandment, even that little one that doesn't matter that says remember. And God says that's what you're supposed to do, and you should teach that. And to not teach that or to break them, even the least of these, and then teach other people to do that is shameful. That's what I think it means. So you tell me what you think it means. Do you agree with me that that's what it's saying, but it's not for us? Or do you think it's saying something different? That was the question. You're getting all triggered, and then you're accusing me of all this stuff I wasn't saying about the Trinity. It's just funny because I've told you so many times. You were talking about the Trinity. My comment, I believe Jesus is the eternal Son. I quote that language all the time. But maybe you're judging me falsely, or you're lying about me. You're either judging me about something you don't know about what I believe, so you shouldn't be judging me, or you know what I believe, which seems like you should, and you're bearing false witness against me. But of course, that's the law, so you better do that. Otherwise, you'd be keeping the law by not bearing false witness. And if you were to not bear false witness, you'd be keeping the commandments. And to keep the commandments is anathema, apparently, which is what he's about to go on to say. So I guess, I don't know. Seems like you're not supposed to bear false witness. I don't know. Because, God doesn't do that, and he says it's bad. And unfortunately, it's one of those darn commandments that we don't do anymore. So I guess we should make sure we bear false witness as much as possible so that we wouldn't be found keeping the commandments and earning our salvation or something. Because obviously that would be worthy of damnation, right? I guess.
keeping the law better than I am, which you're not, because by your so-called keeping the law, you're actually sinning before God and putting a disgrace upon the cross every single time you think you're doing it.
So there you have it. Does he mean that? Yes. I think you are better when you keep the commandments. It is better for you and those around you, because that's what God says. Do I think people are ontologically better, like more valuable? Well, I don't know. Do people who don't receive Christ and grow towards the image of the Son go to hell, and the ones that do believe in Jesus get transformed, go to heaven? Are they better? Hell yeah, they're better. Yes, it's good to do that. So it means that's what it means to be conformed to the image of the Son. To think of yourself as better, is that better? No. You're supposed to love other people, and that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to show you your error. You are literally fulfilling the prophecy of calling good evil and evil good. You just said to keep those laws is actually sin. What does Paul say? Is the law sin? God forbid. You are God forbid, according to Paul. Paul is saying to you, God forbid what you believe. You missed the boat, bro. You missed it. And you're being self-righteous. Listen to these passages in the New Testament. You tell me about. You got something wonky with your thinking about the law here. Listen to these verses, New Testament verses. Listen. The Son of Man will send forth this is Jesus, send forth his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom all stumbling blocks and those who commit lawlessness. That's Jesus speaking about the end of the age. Because, okay, here's another one of Jesus in Matthew 24. Because lawlessness is increased, most people's love will grow cold. 2 Thessalonians 2, Paul talking to Christians about the day of the Lord. For the mystery of lawlessness is already at work. Only he who now restrains will do so until he is taken out of the way and the Antichrist is revealed. And so the mystery of lawlessness was in Paul's day already at work. And so woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you are like whitewashed tombs, which on the outside appear beautiful, but inside they're full of dead men's bones and all uncleanness. So you too outwardly appear righteous to men, but inwardly you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. Hold on. No, don't come in here. Sorry, got a full house. Let's see. So continuing. Everyone who practices sin also practices lawlessness, and sin is lawlessness. Do not be bound together with unbelievers, for what partnership have righteousness and lawlessness? 2 Corinthians. Lawlessness. What partnership does righteousness have with lawlessness? Here is the patience of the saints. Here are they that keep the commandments of God and have the faith of Jesus. Keeping the commandments, not keeping them is lawlessness. So I don't know what to say to people. I mean, this is literally calling evil good and good evil. Literally. It's completely backwards. It says in Isaiah, to the law and to the testimony, if they speak not according to this, there is no light in them. John says, he who says he knows him and keeps not his commandments is a liar, and the truth is not in him. He's obviously, that's that idea. The saints who are led into the city keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus, the faith of Jesus. The one the devil is after in the end times. The devil was wroth with the woman and went to make war with the remnant of her seed who keep the commandments of God and have the faith of Jesus. Paul says is what matters is keeping the commandments of God, which he says is, or when he's talking about circumcision and non-circumcision don't matter, but what matters is keeping the commandments of God. He says the same thing. Is what matters is the new creation. Is what matters is faith working through love. Is faith working through love and keeping the commandments of God antithetical, or are they the same thing? They're the same thing. When you are walking faithfully in love, you are keeping the commandments, particularly the 10 commandments. Why do I say that? Because they're always associated with it. Literally, Romans 13 defines it that way. It's literally a definition. Owe no man anything but to love one another, for he that loveth another has fulfilled the law. In the Old Testament, in Deuteronomy and Leviticus, books of the law of Moses, it tells you that the first 4 commandments are how to love God, and the last 6 commandments are loving your neighbor. So when it says all the law hangs on these 2 things, it's not a replacement. It's a summation. Owe no man anything but to love one another, for he that loveth another hath fulfilled the law. For this, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness, thou shalt not covet. And if there be any other commandment, it is briefly comprehended. So what does briefly comprehended mean? So any other commandment. He names a bunch of the 10 commandments and he says, and any other of them, like even the least of these, maybe even you could say, even the least of them. If there be any other commandment too, all of them, it's briefly comprehended. What does that mean? What is a brief? It's like a condensed shorthand explanation. So is what he's saying is he lists the 10 commandments and any other commandment. So if you've broken one, you've broken them all, because they're all uniquely tied together. You can't remove one and then, because if you taking the Lord's name in vain by necessity would be breaking any of the other ones. So if you take one out and then you were to do that thing, the opposite of that one, that would cause you to not be honoring God's name. So you can't have, they're a group. They're intrinsically tied together. That's why he says, if you've broken, people throw that one at me all the time. If you've broken one, it's like, look, I know that's why we're a sinner. Because if you break one, even one of them, you're guilty. Because they're all tied together. The 10 commandments are all tied together, and they're like a constitution of the entire law. Because the rest flows out of that. So when I say you're supposed to keep God's commandments, and somebody says, but if you've broken one, you've broken them all, you're assuming that I think I'm justified by keeping the law. I'm not saying that. I'm saying this is the standard. This is what tells you what sin is and that you repent of when you come to Christ. Christ doesn't say, now you don't have to keep them. No, sin is what condemns the world. If there be any other commandment, it is briefly comprehended in this saying, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. He lists the commandments that have to do with how to treat man. The first 4 are about God, how we love God. The last 6 are about how we love man on a basic level here, basic principles. You can't break those and love God. You can't break these and say you're loving man. He lists the ones about how you love man, and he says any other commandment related to how you treat other men is briefly summated, briefly comprehended. In short, it's saying, love your neighbor as yourself. And that is a quote from the Old Testament in Leviticus. And it lists the 10 commandments and other laws. And then says, you should love your neighbor as yourself. You could say that last little comment that he's quoting from the Old Testament under the Old Covenant in the books of the law of Moses, when he says, love your neighbor as yourself, you could say that's a brief summation of what was just listed with those laws. So when they gave a brief comprehension of that phrase in the Old Testament, did it do away with those commandments back then too? Or just now somehow? Was that not a summation of that then? He's quoting that. He's getting this idea from the Old Testament, the old book of the law, Moses' law. the 5 books of Moses. That's a quote from the 5 books of Moses. He's just quoting it into the New Testament. Am I saying we're under the law of Moses? No. But I'm saying this idea was true in the Old Covenant. It's not new. It's not a new thing. This love worketh no ill to his neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfilling of the law. It isn't love, which isn't the thing list in the law, is this new thing and it replaces the law. It's saying literally, when you're keeping the law with the Spirit in the new covenant through the power of the resurrection of Christ, who causes you to do that, is the power for you to able to do that, walk in the Spirit. You are doing the things in the law because you have grace and you're forgiven. But it's still the same idea. Do you think God didn't intend that from the beginning? Of course he did. This is not sinning because Jesus saves us from our sin. So literally Romans 13, I guess people think it's saying the opposite of that, what I just said, it seems to me. Those loving, not sinning, like not murdering and not committing adultery, have always been a law, have always existed. They've always been what God's character looks like. So I want to look at one other thing. Is this on the screen? No, it's not on the screen. Let me share that. Let's see. That's weird. It's not showing up. Okay, there we go.